Hello, and welcome to Echoes of the Forgotten Earth, the place where curiosity curls up in a warm chair and science wanders the long, scenic backroads toward questions that somehow feel both out of reach and impossible to ignore. Tonight, we're not only turning our attention to the stars, or the passage of time, or the cycles of nature, but to something a little nearer to the soul. What if we were put here? Not just the slow outcome of geological coincidences and biological improvisations, not only the end result of random rearrangements of atoms and molecules bumping into each other in the dark, but deliberately set down on this specific world in this specific era. That idea has followed our species for as long as we've had the ability to look up and ask, why? Whether wrapped in the clothing of myth, religion, legends of ancient visitors, or a quiet suspicion that surfaces after midnight, the same question keeps hanging in the air. Are we in this spot because someone or something decided that's how it should be? Before we really dive in, I want to start with something small and grounding. Where are you right now as you listen? Maybe you're curled up in a dim room at the end of a long day, letting your mind soften towards sleep. Maybe you're walking, headphones in, your body moving through the ordinary noise of traffic and voices. Maybe you're at your desk, multitasking, sneaking in a brief side trip for your mind in the middle of work. Wherever you happen to be, I'd honestly love to know, because it feels fitting that a conversation about being placed should begin with noticing our own place in this moment. The chair under you, the time on the clock, the mood in your little corner of reality, all of it quietly ties you to this theme in ways that are easy to miss. And if this kind of slow drift through big questions feels comforting, intriguing, or just like a nice way to ease down the day, it would mean a lot if you hit like or subscribe. It helps this small harbor of calm curiosity find more people who might also want to break from the relentless, always-on momentum of everyday life. So let's ease in, not rush. Picture yourself outside on a cloudless night. Stars are scattered overhead, and the moon hangs there with its familiar washed-out glow. In that stillness, it's almost impossible not to feel the tug of the oldest questions. How did all of this begin? Why here? Why now? Why us? The notion that we might have been deliberately placed here carries two very different emotions at the same time: comfort and uneasiness. Comfort because it hints we're not a fluke, that maybe there's intention, some sort of purpose woven into our existence. Unease because if we were placed, then something or someone did the placing. And that opens the door to 1,000 more questions. Who? Why? How? And what for? The story we usually tell about ourselves starts with science. Evolution by natural selection. Mutations stacking on top of each other over billions of years. That narrative lines up with the fossils, with the genes. It explains how life changes to fit its surroundings. But this is exactly where things start to get interesting. Sometimes the timeline of human progress doesn't look like a slow staircase. It looks more like a sudden jump. For ages, stone tools barely changed. Simple shapes, used the same way for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, almost all at once in geological terms, we see art, complex speech, farming, settlements, and then full-blown cities flash into existence. That sudden surge, often called the cognitive revolution, is still one of the big unanswered riddles. What made the minds of our ancestors open up so fast? Why did symbolic thinking, culture, and technology ignite almost as though a hidden switch had been flipped? And it's not just modern researchers who notice that something about us feels abrupt, inserted. Ancient societies across the globe told origin stories that treat humanity as placed rather than slowly, passively grown. The Sumerians described beings known as the Anunnaki, who came down from the heavens and played a role in guiding the birth of civilization. The Dogon people of West Africa told of visitors connected to the star Sirius, who shared knowledge about the universe long before telescopes existed to check it. Many Native American stories speak of people of the sky, messengers and shapers of life who offered teachings and direction. Even the opening pages of the Bible don't picture humans clawing their way into existence from nothing. Instead, people are fashioned and placed in a garden. When you line these stories up side by side, Across cultures, across eras, a pattern starts to emerge. People didn't just see themselves as growing out of nature like trees from the soil. They often imagined being set down, usually from above, often with some kind of mission or purpose attached. Were those narratives just creative attempts to make sense of a mysterious world? Or were they hazy recollections, distant echoes of something our ancestors actually went through? Then there's the planet itself. We love to call Earth a Goldilocks world. Not too hot, not too cold, but in that narrow, just right band. Here, liquid water flows. The atmosphere happens to be the right blend for our lungs. The soil cooperates and grows food. The swing of the seasons shapes the rhythms of life. Skeptics say, of course it feels like a perfect fit we evolved here. So naturally we're adapted to it. But sometimes it feels almost reversed, as if the world itself had been adjusted, tuned, prepared to be a home for creatures like us. There's something called the anthropic principle that says, we see the universe as suitable for life, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't be here asking questions about it. That's logically tidy. And yet for some people, it doesn't erase the itch that maybe there's more going on than pure coincidence. Maybe this world was not just one lucky roll of the cosmic dice. Maybe it was selected. Maybe human beings were placed here on purpose, because Earth was the ideal stage. Now, let's step outside ourselves for a second. Imagine you're not human at all. You're some distant observer watching this planet's story play out over billions of years. You see oceans condense, continents drift, mountain ranges thrust upward, forests unfurl. For a long, long time, things change. Slowly. Then, in a tiny flicker of deep time, something strange appears. One species starts reshaping coastlines and plains, building elaborate settlements, sending invisible signals out into space, launching machines beyond the atmosphere that cradle them. If you didn't already know the step-by-step evolutionary backstory, you might easily believe this species had been introduced from somewhere else, because nothing else on the planet acts remotely the same way. Our brains, especially, are oddities. They're huge for the size of our bodies, voracious consumers of energy, and able to imagine, remember, and become aware of themselves far beyond what simple survival seems to require. Most animals find their ecological role and stay within it. Birds fly, fish swim, big cats hunt, insects pollinate. We, on the other hand, don't just adjust to a niche. We break out of it. We dream up futures, shape tools that never existed in nature, craft stories and store knowledge for people who haven't even been born yet. It's as though our minds are over-engineered for the environment. Too capable, too prepared. Why carry that surplus capacity? Did it really just arise from random changes over time? Or did some kind of intention lie behind it? Researchers who focus on evolution will often admit that the quick rise in human intelligence is still a head-scratcher. They'll point to the invention of language, to complex social cooperation, to shifts in diet like cooked meat that may have fueled brain growth. Those factors help. But even with all of them, there's still a hint of strangeness. How did all those traits converge so fast in one species and not another? Some thinkers push even further and ask, what if life on this planet didn't start entirely by itself? There's a scientific idea called panspermia. The notion that the building blocks of life or even simple living organisms might have arrived here on rocks or comets from space. If that were the case, Earth wouldn't be the original birthplace of life, but more like a nursery, seeded either by chance or on purpose from somewhere else. And if simple life can be seeded, maybe intelligence can be as well. Could beings unimaginably older than us have shaped, guided, or even planted humanity here? If they did, why? Maybe we're a long-term experiment. Maybe we're a project. Maybe we're a way of carrying some piece of their story forward. There's another route our imagination can take. What if it wasn't visitors from other stars at all, but humans from our own distant future? If time is more elastic than we usually think, if someday we learn to travel along it in both directions, could future humans have gone back and set up their own origin point? Could they have placed themselves in their own deep past in order to guarantee that a future like theirs would exist? Ideas like this are, of course, speculative, some would say, wild, but they keep popping up in the human imagination because they speak to a deeper need. We want to know whether we're here for a reason. We want some sense of whether our lives are part of a design or just the after effects of blind randomness. So the question, what if we were placed here, gradually becomes less about the physical mechanics and more about meaning. You might already notice how this one question naturally flows into both science and myth, into both rational thought and quiet feeling. It becomes a bridge between our demand for evidence and our craving for story. Maybe that's why it refuses to fade away. So as we start this long wander together, let's resist the urge to slam the door too fast. Let's not immediately pick a favorite explanation. Ancient civilizations seeding us, cosmic gardeners sowing worlds, future humans looping through time, or the idea that no one placed us at all. Instead, we can stroll through the clues, the legends, the proposals, the what-ifs. We can see where each path wants to take us and notice what it stirs inside us as we walk it. Let's stay with the question for a while, because it's not the sort of thought you glance at once and then toss aside. It's the kind that quietly follows you while you're brewing tea, waiting at a bus stop, or scrolling your phone in the dark before bed. What if we were placed here? The sentence itself is short, almost plain, but the idea behind it opens into a huge landscape. Placed here by whom? Placed here why? Placed here when? The more you pull on that thread, the more strands show up, and soon you realize you're holding something far bigger than the original question. For most of us, we start in the same place, with a basic fact. We exist. We are on this planet that happens to support us in ways so precise it can feel almost eerie. Make a list of all the little requirements that need to line up for our kind of life to work, and it starts to sound like someone wrote a checklist tailored to us. Oxygen levels hovering right where our lungs need them, an atmosphere thick enough to block dangerous radiation, yet thin enough to let in warmth and light. A magnetic field shielding us from solar particles. Liquid water covering most of the surface. A sun with a steady, reliable energy output. A moon that stabilizes Earth's tilt and drives the tides. Each piece, taken alone, is impressive. Taken together, they form something that feels incredibly rare. Scientists will often answer, well, of course it looks special. If conditions weren't suitable, we wouldn't be here to notice at all. That's the anthropic principle again, warning us that our viewpoint is biased, only survivors get to ask questions. But even knowing that, the doubt still whispers, is it really just luck that all of this lined up so precisely? Or is there at least some chance, however strange it sounds, that we were placed here on purpose? When people first encounter that idea, they tend to divide into two rough camps. One camp says, no need for that. We arose step by step through natural forces. Bringing in a placer is just telling stories. The other camp says, maybe the picture isn't quite that simple. Maybe there's more going on than slow evolution and random chance alone. Both reactions make sense. Both leave space for curiosity. So let's sit with that second reaction for a minute. Let's pretend, purely as a mental exercise, that we really were placed here. What would that actually imply? One option is that some higher intelligence, call it divine, call it extraterrestrial, call it hyper-advanced future humans, chose Earth as our home and shaped it to be that way. Another is that seeds of life drifting through space on icy rocks found their way here and thrived, making this world not just a random success, but maybe a targeted seeding. And then there's the most unsettling version, that we were placed here without any explanation, left to figure out or never figure out what the point is. To untangle this, it helps to notice how strange we are as a species. Compared to most animals, we're odd. We stand upright, freeing our hands to craft tools and carry ideas. Our brains are enormous energy hogs, burning through about a fifth of the calories we consume, a huge gamble for nature to take. Our intelligence lets us reshape whole ecosystems, not just adapt to the ones we're given. And then there's consciousness, not just being alive, but being able to inspect our own aliveness, to think about how we think. That part remains deeply mysterious. If all of this comes solely from evolution, why did it happen so fast and so dramatically in us but not in others? Why don't dolphins with their big brains build vast coastal cities? Why haven't elephants with their family structures and memories invented written scripts? What propelled humans into art, music, farming, and technology within what, from Earth's point of view, was barely more than a blink? It's at this point that the idea of being placed can start to feel less like pure fantasy and more like an attempt to account for what looks like a series of anomalies. Maybe we got a nudge. Maybe something or someone sped us up. Maybe intelligence itself was planted in our line like a spark waiting for dry wood. Old myths lean heavily into that possibility. Nearly every culture has stories of visitors from the sky or beyond bringing knowledge, tools, or even life itself. The Sumerians spoke of divine beings descending to shape humankind. The Maya told of figures that came bearing wisdom. The ancient Egyptians credited their gods with teaching them how to farm, how to write, how to build monumental structures. Even in traditions closer to many of us, we hear echoes of being crafted and placed in particular locations, whether that's a garden or a promised land. None of these are peer-reviewed data, but collectively, they shine a light on something deep in how humans imagine themselves. Across time and geography, we lean toward the belief that we were set here on purpose rather than just stumbling into existence by accident. Maybe that's because the idea of being placed offers something accident never quite does, a sense that our lives matter in some larger way. Of course, scientific thinking tells us to be careful. Big claims require big proof. So far, fossils and DNA still support natural evolution as the underlying framework for our species. Yet inside that framework, the big questions don't entirely go away. Why did our thinking suddenly leap? Why did symbolic culture erupt? Why did civilization pile up so quickly? Those open spaces are fertile soil for speculation, and that speculation very often flows back to the same wondering. What if we were placed here? Now let's tilt the camera in a different direction. Picture humanity thousands or millions of years ahead of where we are. If they had figured out time travel or discovered physics we can't yet imagine, could they reach back and seed their own beginnings? Could they place early humans or pre-humans into their own deep past, sculpting history from the other side? It sounds like a movie plot, and maybe it belongs there, but it also underscores something important. A placer doesn't always have to be a god or an alien. The ones doing the placing could be us, from a future we haven't yet reached. Then, there's the more familiar possibility: beings from beyond our star. Astronomers never stop reminding us how vast the universe is. Billions of stars in our galaxy alone, billions of galaxies beyond that, more planets than we can realistically imagine, endless chances for life to appear. If very old, very advanced civilizations exist out there, it's not a stretch to wonder whether they might explore, experiment, even cultivate life on other worlds. If you had the power to seed intelligence on a promising planet, would you be tempted? And if you did, how would the minds you planted ever be certain they weren't just looking at a natural history, rather than one that had been quietly edited? The unsettling part isn't only whether any of this is true, it's what it would mean. If we were placed, then our existence is entangled with someone else's project, plan, or curiosity. Maybe they meant well. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe it was an accident. We could be caretakers, test cases, or just one thread in a pattern too large for us to see. We don't have solid answers, just story fragments, strange clues, and that persistent itch of a question that doesn't quite go away. But maybe, for now, that's enough. Maybe this question is most valuable not because we can solve it, but because of how it rearranges our perspective while we hold it. When you picture yourself as having been placed here, even as a purely hypothetical exercise, the world around you shifts a little. Forests, oceans, and skies stop feeling like simple background scenery. They start to feel like a set, a stage. Your own life stops looking like random static and starts to feel more like a line in a script or a chapter in a larger book. Whether or not we actually were placed, the idea itself changes how we move through things. It nudges us to think about meaning, about responsibility, about what we might be capable of, in ways that pure randomness rarely does. Maybe that's why we keep circling back to it, generation after generation, culture after culture. As we go deeper into this exploration, try carrying the question with you, not as a puzzle you're desperate to solve, but as a lens, a way to look at data, legends, and theories and see them in a slightly different light. What if we were placed here? Not just a riddle to crack, but a way of seeing ourselves, our planet, and our place in the wider universe. When you really start paying attention to Earth, it's hard not to notice how precisely it seems to match us. We breathe without effort, draw water from rivers and taps, coax food from the soil, and walk across its surface as if it were designed for exactly that. The more details you stack up, the less the planet feels like a random stone drifting in space, and the more it feels like a carefully prepared residence. Oxygen hangs around 21%, a razor-thin window that lets us release energy inside our bodies without setting ourselves on fire. The air overhead filters the sun's radiation, letting light and warmth through while blocking most of the lethal stuff. Earth's magnetic field reaches out like an invisible shield, deflecting solar storms that could strip the atmosphere away. Water covers most of the globe, not so little that we dry out, not so much that we're swallowed entirely, but enough to sustain vast oceans, rivers, lakes, and rain cycles. From a scientific standpoint, each of these traits has a physical explanation. Earth orbits within the so-called habitable zone, far enough from the sun not to bake, close enough not to freeze, with temperatures where liquid water can exist. The planet's mass is big enough to hang on to an atmosphere. Its molten core spins up that protective magnetic field. Its axial tilt, stabilized in part by the moon, creates seasons that support biodiversity. Every piece can be traced back to gravity, chemistry, and physics. Bundle them together, and what looks miraculous is, in the strictest sense, just what happens under the right conditions. And yet, when you zoom out from the equations, it still feels uncanny. Why this world? Why this level of perfection? Right here. Line Earth up next to its neighbors, and the contrast sharpens. Mars, for all its appeal, is dusty, cold, and wrapped in a paper-thin atmosphere. Venus, on the other side, is a runaway greenhouse furnace, hot enough to melt metal on its surface. Mercury bakes on one side, freezes on the other, and the giant outer planets are swirling balls of gas with no solid ground at all. Even their more promising moons, Europa, Titan, and Enceladus, would be brutally hostile to us without heavy technology. Earth is the odd one out, the rare exception. When astronomers go hunting for life in other systems, they're essentially looking for another Earth, because this planet is the reference point, the gold standard. But even that language is revealing. We're not just living on any old sphere of rock. We're living on one that seems unusually and maybe suspiciously well aligned with our needs. And at some point you have to at least ask, why does the fit feel so exact? One answer is straightforward. We're shaped by this place. We didn't arrive prepackaged. We evolved here. Our lungs match the atmosphere because the atmosphere shaped them. Our diet fits what this soil grows because we adapted to what was already available. Our bodies, brains, and behaviors were tuned by this environment over deep time. That's compelling, but it doesn't erase all the curiosity. Because then you step back and ask, in a universe full of dust, ice, and brutal extremes, why did a planet like this appear at all? Why did these particular conditions come together here and not in the countless other places where the ingredients never quite lined up? Some will say it's just statistics. With so many galaxies, so many stars, so many worlds, eventually one or a few were bound to get everything just right for life. We're on one of those rare successes, and that's why we're even around to notice it. That explanation is clean, but for some, it feels like sidestepping the deeper itch. Odds can tell us how something might happen, but they don't address the emotional sense that this planet feels not only livable, but almost too perfectly suited to us. Look at the sun. It's steady, not wildly flaring in a way that would constantly sterilize the surface. Its output is remarkably consistent over the time scales life needs. It's the right size, in the right life stage, with the right kind of light for photosynthesis and warmth. Even the moon-quiet gray, easily taken for granted, plays a strangely crucial role. It helps anchor Earth's tilt, preventing chaotic swings that could make climate wildly unstable. It pulls on the oceans, driving the tides, which may have been critical in the early chemistry that led to life. Remove the moon, and Earth might be far more erratic and less welcoming. The weirdness deepens when you think about how life and the planet interact. Plants exhale oxygen that animals inhale. Animals breathe out carbon dioxide that plants then drink in. Oceans absorb and move heat, smoothing out temperature extremes. Forests bind soil, help call in rain, and create microclimates. Everything loops back into everything else. It's not just a planet with a life on top. It's a tightly coupled system. Some scientists have compared this to a self-regulating organism and call it the Gaia hypothesis. Life and the Earth shaping each other in feedback loops that keep conditions within a life-friendly range. That doesn't mean the planet is conscious, but it does suggest that Earth behaves as if it's constantly nudging itself toward balance. If you believe in pure chance, that's already remarkable. If you're even slightly open to the idea of being placed, it can start to feel like a hint. Maybe our world isn't just the lucky winner of a billion cosmic lotteries. Maybe it was selected, tuned, or gently prepared for us. Ancient perspectives often gravitated toward that feeling. Many indigenous worldviews see Earth not as a pile of resources, but as a giver, a relative, a caretaker. The land feeds you, the sky waters you, the cycles return what's been taken. Those stories carry the intuition that the bond between humans and Earth is intentional, that we're meant to be here, not just squatting by accident. Modern science, careful about words like intention, usually stops short of implying any will or purpose. Yet even scientists sometimes find themselves using language that sounds oddly reverent. They talk about Earth as fragile, delicately balanced, rare. They reach for phrases like finely tuned and just right, because honestly, it's hard not to. The longer you stare at this planet with clear eyes, the more it feels astonishing, even if you can trace every step back to physics and chemistry. Now try a different vantage point. Imagine you're part of a far-off civilization scanning our solar system. One planet would leap out immediately. It glows deep blue from oceans, streaked with white clouds, patched with greens and browns. Its atmosphere carries the chemical fingerprints of oxygen, a strong clue that life is busy down there. If you were in the business of cultivating life, planting intelligence, or simply looking for a place to watch something complex emerge, this would be the obvious candidate. And maybe that's exactly why the question won't leave us alone. If you wanted to place a species like us somewhere, wouldn't you pick this planet? If your goal was to give life a generous chance, wouldn't you choose the world that already looks like a paradise compared to the harshness next door? None of this is proof. It's reflection, pattern noticing, wondering. But it does help explain why the idea that Earth fits us almost too well has had such staying power. Through myths, through science, we keep circling the same intuition. We feel like we belong here, and that sense of belonging is powerful. If we imagine ourselves as placed, then Earth stops being a neutral backdrop. It becomes a set, intentionally arranged. Every forest, every shoreline, every sunrise feels less like coincidence and more like invitation. Even if that's not literally true, thinking this way can shift how we behave. We become more cautious, more caring, more aware that this world is not guaranteed to stay the way it is. If the planet fits us this well, it's worth asking the reverse. How well do we fit it? That may be the thread quietly running through all of this. Earth has been shockingly generous. So generous that we've gotten used to it, barely noticing the miracle. We walk its ground, drink its water, fill our lungs with its air, and silently assume it will always be this easy. But if, even for a moment, you entertain the idea that we were placed here, the fit begins to feel like a reminder instead of a given. We were handed a world that can sustain us. And the next question is both simple and heavy. What are we going to do with it? Seeing ourselves as placed doesn't have to involve watchful overseers, elaborate experiments, or rigid cosmic blueprints. Sometimes it just means waking up to how extraordinary this planet truly is. And once you see it that way, it's hard to unsee. When most people picture human origins, a familiar image comes to mind. That neat textbook illustration of figures gradually straightening from ape-like shapes into modern humans walking upright. It's tidy, satisfying, and deeply misleading. Real evolution doesn't march in a straight line. It branches, it tangles, it doubles back. Some branches flourish, others end abruptly. Different human-like species overlap in time and place, disappearing for reasons we still don't fully grasp. When you look closely, our path is far less obvious than we like to think. And in those blank spots, the idea that we might have been placed here slips in quietly. Fossils show that life on Earth has been changing for billions of years. Single-celled organisms gave way to more complex forms, fish hauled themselves onto land, amphibians gave way to reptiles and mammals. Somewhere among the primates, a line appeared that started walking upright, using tools and growing larger brains. These early hominins weren't us, but they were close cousins. They hunted and scavenged, navigated dangerous landscapes, and raised their young without written language, laws, or cities. And then, again, something unusual unfolds. Archaeologists talk about a period sometimes called the Great Leap Forward. In a relatively short window, humans go from a survival-focused existence to one rich with culture. Suddenly we see vivid paintings deep in caves, full of animals, symbols, and scenes. Tools become more refined and diverse, shaped with clear thought and sometimes even with decoration. Burial sites show patterns that look like ritual, hinting at beliefs about death and maybe even an afterlife. Spoken language likely matured in this era too, letting ideas and stories travel far beyond what any one person could see. What perplexes many scientists is the speed of this shift. For ages, toolmaking had been a slow, minimal affair. Rough flakes, simple hand axes, the basics needed to get by. Then, in what feels like an instant compared to the long prehistory before, art, music, symbols, and constructed shelters emerge. Why that sudden explosion of imagination and intellect? Was it just that brains finally crossed a threshold in size and wiring? Or did something else help tip us over the edge? Genetics complicates the picture further. When we compare our genome to that of other primates, we see small but crucial differences, especially in areas linked to brain development, speech, and social behavior. Some of these changes appear to have come in clusters, as though several key upgrades arrived in a small evolutionary window. Evolution is usually a patient craftsman. So why do some of our defining traits look like they were rolled out in a rush? The gap between humans and our closest relatives makes the question sharper. Chimpanzees share more than 98% of our DNA. On paper, we look almost identical. Yet in practice, the difference is enormous. Chimps can learn some basic tools and solve puzzles, but they don't build complex settlements. They communicate, but they don't craft open-ended languages rich with metaphor and abstraction. They form social groups, but they don't invent ethics, mathematics, or long-term technology. If evolution is purely gradual, with no external nudges, how does such a small percentage of genetic variance translate into such a vast cognitive gulf? For some, that gap hints that something unusual might have stepped in. Did we receive a boost, a spark, a layer of information from elsewhere? Supporters of more speculative ideas often turn back to myth. Again and again, origin stories describe gods or sky beings directly shaping humans. Sumerian texts speak of divine figures combining heavenly essence with earthly material to create people. In Greek myth, Prometheus defies the gods to bring fire symbolic of knowledge and technology to humanity. Elsewhere, humans are molded by higher beings, then given language, farming, or law as deliberate gifts. Whether we treat these accounts as literal, as metaphor, or as muddled memories, they share a core theme. Humanity wasn't just an accident that happened. Something was given, something was placed, guided, or altered. The archaeological record adds more fuel to the fire. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, more than 11,000 years old, show massive stone pillars arranged with precision and decorated with carvings. By our standard textbook timelines, people of that era should have been simple hunter-gatherers, without the hierarchy, surplus food, or tools needed to pull off such massive projects, yet the evidence stands there in stone. How did they do it? How did symbolic architecture appear so early? Similar questions surround certain ancient maps, tales of lost high cultures, and the surprisingly early arrival of advanced knowledge in places like Mesopotamia, the Nile Valley, and elsewhere. To some eyes, history doesn't look like a steady climb. It looks like civilization bursting onto the scene in sudden, ahead-of-schedule waves. Skeptics will say that humans are simply far more inventive than we tend to give our ancestors credit for. Knowledge can be lost and rediscovered, cultures can innovate independently, and our underestimation of early ingenuity makes perfectly natural developments look mysterious. That's a valid caution. But for those willing to entertain other possibilities, these anomalies can feel like faint traces, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, we had help. We might have been taught. We might have been, in some sense, placed. Even language itself is a mystery within a mystery. Our ability to share intricate ideas, to talk about the past and imagine the future, to name things that aren't physically present, that capacity seems to arrive fully featured. We don't find half languages slowly ramping up in complexity in the historical record. Wherever we find humans, we find rich, structured speech. It's as if, once the brain architecture was there, language snapped into place very quickly. Was that purely a cultural tipping point? Or was there a deeper shift behind it, biological, environmental, or otherwise? Then there's consciousness, the strangest element of all. It's one thing to see, hear, and react to your surroundings. It's another to be aware that you are the one seeing and reacting. To sit and wonder about your own life, about meaning, death, the shape of the universe. We can map neurons. We can describe electrical pulses, chemical signals, and brain networks. But the raw experience of being, of having an inner world, still defies easy explanation. From a survival point of view, you don't obviously need that level of self-awareness. You don't need to ponder mortality or purpose to find food. Yet here we are, doing exactly that. If you imagine that someone wanted to create a species that would endlessly question, endlessly search its own origins and place in the cosmos, you would build it almost exactly the way humans are built. Bright, imaginative, deeply self-aware, and just uncertain enough to keep looking. That's where the idea of being placed starts to feel less like a wild outside insertion and more like one of several possible interpretations of a very peculiar story. At the same time, it's important not to rush every unexplained pattern into the arms of some external agent. History is full of moments when things once thought to be the direct work of gods turned out to be lightning, bacteria, plate tectonics, or orbit mechanics. Thunder became weather science. Plagues became microbiology. The wandering lights in the night sky became mapped orbits and star systems. It's entirely possible that the mysteries of our origin will eventually be mapped clearly through fossils, genetics, and new forms of analysis we don't have yet. But even if that happens, a different kind of why will still be waiting in the background. Why did these particular chains of events unfold at all? Why this brain, this consciousness, this sudden leap? And that's the space where the placement question keeps breathing. If you could watch Earth's human story from a high vantage point, sped up like a time-lapse film, you'd see small groups roaming open lands, crafting simple tools, sharing fires at night. Then suddenly, splashes of color bloom in caves. Fires burn within structured dwellings. Villages gather into towns. Then cities. Massive stone shapes rise inscribed with meaning. Writing appears. Ships cross oceans. Engines roar to life. Satellites encircle the globe. From that vantage point, our transformation looks less like a slow evolution and more like an accelerating cascade. Even if science can eventually explain every step, the feeling that something unusual happened here can be hard to shake. The puzzle of our origins isn't just about bones and sequences of DNA. It's about why our story is so out of step with everything else around us. Why we seem tuned not only to survive, but to wonder about survival. Maybe that's the quiet clue. We're the animal that questions itself. Others eat, mate, defend territory, and adapt. We do all of that too, but also lie awake asking why. Perhaps that persistent questioning is itself the closest thing we have to evidence that we didn't just drift here by accident. Maybe the very act of asking is part of what it means to have been placed. When we talk about evolution, we usually picture it as a slow, steady crawl. Tiny advantages building up over countless generations, small shifts in bone structure or behavior gradually turning one form of life into another. And a lot of the time, that picture holds. A fin slowly reshapes into a limb. Fur gets a bit thicker in colder climates. Eyes become sharper, piece by piece, as organisms adapt to their surroundings. It's a process that takes time, more time than any one lifetime can grasp. The fossil record is full of these incremental steps, layered in rock like pages in a very long book. But there's something odd in that record too. Every so often, instead of gentle slopes, we see cliffs. Not smooth transitions, but sudden bursts. Moments when evolution seems to slam its foot on the gas. The human story is one of the clearest examples, but it's not the only one. For millions of years, our early relatives chipped away at roughly the same kinds of tools. Basic stones, simple edges, functional and familiar. Then, within a relatively narrow window of time, the toolkit blossoms. We start seeing specialized blades, points, needles, ornaments. Art appears, music appears, symbols and structures appear. To biologists, that kind of leap is jarring because natural selection usually works slowly, not in fireworks. Zoom further back in time, and you see an even more dramatic case. The Cambrian explosion, about 540 million years ago. For billions of years before that, life on Earth was mostly simple. Single cells, small colonies, soft-bodied creatures without much complexity. Then, over what's geologically a brief period, life diversifies wildly. Suddenly there are animals with shells, skeletons, jaws, eyes, and a wide variety of body plans. Nearly all the major animal groups we know today trace their ancestry back to that strange chapter. It's as if evolution moved from sketching rough outlines to painting detailed portraits almost overnight. Scientists have proposed many explanations for the Cambrian surge: rising oxygen levels enabling larger bodies, key genetic innovations like the development of Hox genes that control how bodies are laid out, new predator-prey dynamics forcing rapid adaptation. All of those likely played a role. But even with those factors, the pace of change still stands out. If evolution were a long, slow novel, the Cambrian chapter would read like an abrupt plot twist. Human evolution shows smaller versions of that same pattern. Take our brain size. For a long stretch, the brains of our hominin ancestors grew only slightly from one species to the next. Then, in a comparatively short span, brain volume roughly doubles. Larger brains bring advantages: more flexible problem solving, better memory, more social complexity. But they're also extremely costly. They demand huge amounts of energy. They make childbirth more dangerous. They leave our infants helpless for years. Why would evolution drive such a risky, resource-intensive change? And why would it do it that fast? Or think about language. For ages, our ancestors probably relied on simple gestures and sounds. Then at some point, the capacity for full-blown language, the ability to discuss the past, imagine the future, and talk about things that aren't present clicks into place. Language doesn't just add another tool. It rewires how culture works. Knowledge can now accumulate, spread, and evolve much faster than genes alone. Again, the transition looks less like a gentle slope and more like a sharp corner. It's as if some mental lock opened and a torrent of possibility poured through. Agriculture follows a similar pattern. For most of our time on this planet, we roamed as hunter-gatherers, following the seasons and living from what the land spontaneously offered. Then within a relatively tight window in several different regions, people figure out how to plant, tend, and harvest crops. They learn how to store food. Villages form. Surpluses appear. Soon there are towns, then cities, then complex societies. Compared to the vast expanse of prehistory before it, this transition is abrupt. Some biologists have tried to capture this pattern with the idea of punctuated equilibrium. Instead of a smooth upward curve, evolution looks like a staircase. Long periods of relative stability punctuated by shorter, intense bursts of change. It's a useful way to think about what we see in the rocks, but it still leaves you with the question, why do those leaps happen when they do? What lights the fuse? Others step outside the standard picture entirely and wonder if these leaps might be signs of something more. If life didn't originate here, but was seeded, as panspermia suggests. Maybe each major leap marks a new infusion, new genes, new instructions, new pushes. If advanced civilizations out there treat planets like gardens, maybe they occasionally fertilize promising worlds, adding or tweaking DNA, seeding new traits, or nudging evolution ahead during key windows. In that framing, the big jumps wouldn't be accidents. They'd be signatures. Ancient stories, again, echo something along those lines. People all over the world told tales in which humans receive sudden gifts. Fire that transforms what we can do with the world. Agriculture that transforms how we live on it. Writing that transforms how we remember. Prometheus doesn't help humans invent fire step by slow step. He steals it and delivers it. Agricultural deities don't just cheer us on while we experiment. They arrive with knowledge already in hand. Of course, from a skeptical point of view, this looks like how we dramatize gradual changes. We compress long developments into single mythic moments, because that's how stories work. We like turning slow shifts into decisive events. But even through that lens, we still bump into hard data points. Göbekli Tepe rising before agriculture should exist. Pyramids showing up with astonishing precision and astronomical alignment. Sudden cultural flourishes that seem to appear without a long visible runway. Genetic studies add another twist. When scientists compare genomes, they sometimes notice regions in humans that seem to have changed faster than expected, with many coordinated tweaks arriving over short spans. A few researchers have even floated the idea that some of these changes look like deliberate edits. That's controversial and far from consensus. But the fact that mainstream scientists even voice that possibility shows how peculiar these bursts can look. Behind all this detail is a larger question. Why does life keep leaping toward complexity at all? If the universe is purely indifferent, why should brains, language, and consciousness grow out of simple chemistry? You don't need calculus to digest food. You don't need symphonies to replicate DNA. You don't need abstract ethics to avoid predators. Yet here we are, producing art, philosophy, science, and spiritual traditions, driven by needs that go far beyond mere survival. Some have suggested that the universe might actually favor complexity, that once life appears, it tends, under the right conditions, to climb toward minds. If that's true, then sudden leaps might be built into the rules of reality, not evidence of outside intervention. Others point out that, as far as we can tell, high intelligence seems rare. If complexity were inevitable, where are all the other civilizations? Why don't we see clear signs of them? And so, the question remains open. Are those leaps just nature's way of throwing us curveballs? Or are they footprints of something or someone helping things along? Maybe it's not either or. Maybe natural processes in some form of placement are threads in the same tapestry. What we do know is this. Without those jumps, we wouldn't be here. Without the Cambrian flourish, there might be no animals like us at all. Without the brain expansion, the language burst, the agricultural turn, we might still be scattered bands making simple tools under open skies. Instead, we've become a species that builds megacities, sends probes beyond our solar system, and questions its own existence. Those leaps carried us to this point, however they happened. And they help explain why the idea of being placed feels so emotionally plausible, even to people who don't fully believe it. When history moves in sudden surges instead of slow, gentle slopes, it starts to look less like random wandering and more like something with a plan. Whether that plan is just the hidden logic of nature, the tendency of life to climb, or the work of gardeners we don't yet know how to see, we can't say for sure. But we can say this. Something about our timeline feels unusual. Something about those leaps makes our path feel not just random, but remarkable. Across every stretch of land where humans have ever lived, we've told stories about the sky. Sometimes it's the home of gods. Sometimes it's the realm our ancestors went to. Sometimes it's the place where fire, knowledge, or laws first came from. What's striking is how often the sky shows up as the origin point of something that changes everything down here. Listen carefully, and many of these myths start sounding less like bedtime tales and more like half-remembered accounts, passed from voice to voice over ages. Take the Sumerians, one of the earliest known civilizations. Their tablets describe figures called the Anunnaki, beings who, according to their stories, descended from the heavens. These sky-born figures, they said, were involved in the creation and direction of humanity, teaching them agriculture, building, and governance. Rulers even claimed lineage from them, as though to anchor their authority not just to the land, but to the stars. Scholars label these accounts mythology, but the Sumerians themselves didn't seem to treat them as mere fiction. In their own context, these were histories. Look at ancient Egypt. Gods like Thoth and Osiris are credited with bringing order, knowledge, and civilization. The Great Pyramids are not just big stone piles. They're oriented with astonishing precision, their shafts aligned with key stars and constellations. The builders seemed intent on tying the resting places of their pharaohs to specific points in the sky. Whether you read that as symbolism or something more literal, the message is hard to miss. The heavens weren't just above them, they were central to how they understood their own beginnings. Greek myth gives us Prometheus, who steals fire from the gods and hands it to humans. Fire, in that story, is more than flame. It's a stand-in for knowledge, for technology, for creativity itself. Human advancement is portrayed not as a slow grind, but as a dramatic, gift-like event. Cross the ocean to the Americas and you find similar themes. Mayan sacred texts describe gods that come from the sky to form humans, first from mud, then from wood, and finally from maize. The process reads like a series of prototypes, attempts at shaping a being that can fulfill a certain role. In Andean myth, Viracocha emerges from the water, shapes the world, and then ascends to the sky, bringing with him the seeds of civilization. Many native traditions in North America reference star people or sky beings, teachers, healers, or guides who descend from above. In West Africa, the Dogon people tell stories of beings associated with Sirius, including details about that star system that appear oddly sophisticated for their time. Debates rage over how they came by that information. Careful observation, cultural diffusion, or something else. Across the Pacific, in Polynesian traditions, ancestors and deities are sometimes described as arriving in canoes that traverse both sea and sky. In ancient Hindu texts, the Vedas describe vimanas, flying chariots of the gods, complete with technical-sounding details about their motion and capabilities. In all of these cases, whether purely symbolic or not, power, knowledge, and transformation come from above. Abrahamic traditions follow the pattern too. Genesis opens with a god who forms humans and places them in a garden, shaping them from dust, but animating them with breath from beyond. Angels descend from the heavens with messages and warnings. The vertical axis, heaven above, earth below, frames humanity as something that came from elsewhere, then was set here. Anthropologists often explain this in psychological terms. Early people looked up, saw unpredictable storms, lightning, eclipses, comets, forces too vast to control or understand, and naturally projected power onto the sky. So of course they placed their gods there. That explanation is reasonable. But there's another way to hear these stories, as distorted echoes of something real. If we actually were placed here from somewhere above, how would our ancestors remember it? If visitors came in shining craft or descending lights, how would people without modern language describe them? Probably as gods or messengers from the heavens. It's easy from our modern vantage point to wave myths away as metaphor. But the repetition across time and geography is hard to ignore. Societies separated by oceans, deserts, and ages still tell stories that rhyme. Beings from the sky arriving to shape life, leaving knowledge and structures behind. That consistency could be the mark of shared human imagination, or it could be the residue of a shared experience. Think about how stories travel. They aren't lab notes. They're passed down in songs, tales, carvings, rituals. Every generation adds a little, forgets a little. Details warp, symbols accumulate, but a central idea can persist, carried like a seed. Over thousands of years, a real encounter, if there ever was one, could easily blur into legend, then solidify into sacred narrative. If something extraordinary did happen long ago, if we were placed or guided, this is exactly how we'd expect it to echo. Then there are the physical traces that seem to point upward. Many ancient monuments are aligned with stars or solar events in ways that suggest more than casual skywatching. Stonehenge in England tracks the solstices, The pyramids at Giza map onto Orion's belt. Temples and structures in the Americas point towards sunrise or sunset on key days of the year. Why would early humans, busy with sheer survival, pour so much labor into aligning stone with the sky? Maybe reverence, maybe a way of marking time, maybe a way of saying, over and over, we come from there. The more closely you look, the more myth bleeds into mystery. Flying chariots, gods descending in beams of light, voices thundering from above, visitors raining down fire or knowledge, civilizations claiming they were taught the basics of living, farming, metalworking, writing by beings who came from the sky. To a modern ear, a lot of that sounds eerily like people trying to describe advanced technology without the vocabulary for it. Craft in the air, devices that roar and glow, weapons of terrifying power. Maybe that's a stretch. Maybe it isn't. Either way, it shows how powerfully these old accounts grab our imagination. Skeptics remind us, humans are natural pattern makers and storytellers. We anthropomorphize storms. We turn natural events into characters and plots. We invent celestial dramas to make sense of chaos, and that's true. But even skeptics agree that myths often preserve bits of real history. Stories of great floods may be memories of actual cataclysms. Tales of god-kings may hide kernels of political reality. If so, then stories about sky visitors could also be preserving something. Step back, and the pattern repeats loudly. Again and again, people claim we came from above, that knowledge was delivered, that life was shaped by those from the skies. That doesn't prove we were placed, but it does keep the possibility alive that our oldest stories are not entirely imagined. Maybe they are misremembered history. Maybe we don't just feel like we were placed here because Earth is such a comfortable fit. Maybe our first storytellers were already trying to tell us we were. When you stand among the ruins of ancient civilizations, there's a strange mix of awe and confusion. Massive pyramids, sprawling stone complexes, intricate carvings, and alignments with the stars all whisper that the people who built them were far from primitive. But right alongside the admiration sits that persistent question: how did they manage this, and how did they do it so early? Look at the Sumerians, often labeled the first great civilization. Rising in Mesopotamia more than 5,000 years ago, they developed one of the earliest writing systems, worked out sophisticated math, built irrigation networks to tame rivers, and codified laws. They raised towering ziggurats, stepped temples stretching upward toward the sky. They tracked celestial movements and created calendars with impressive accuracy. Reading their clay tablets today, you don't get the sense of a culture fumbling in the dark. They seem to appear already advanced, almost as if they started near the middle of the ladder instead of at the bottom. And in their own records, they don't credit themselves alone. They say they were taught by beings from above the Anunnaki. Modern historians call those beings gods, in the mythological sense. The Sumerians, though, seemed quite serious about them. Ancient Egypt presents a similar puzzle. The Great Pyramid of Giza still dominates the landscape, even in ruins of time. Over 400 feet tall, it's aligned with the cardinal directions with such precision that even with lasers and GPS, we're impressed by how closely it matches true north. Some of the stone blocks used in these complexes weigh tens of tons, some far more. Our modern cranes would struggle with them, yet ancient builders managed to quarry, transport, and position them with methods we still debate. Then there are the celestial connections. The three main pyramids at Giza appear to mirror the stars of Orion's belt, and interior shafts seem aimed at particular stars. That implies not just engineering skill, but careful, long-term sky observation. The conventional story is that these structures are tombs, but when you consider their scale, precision, and astronomical nuance, it's easy to feel that something more is going on. Travel west to Central America, and you find the Maya and Aztecs leaving their own stone enigmas behind. Jungle-covered pyramids, ceremonial plazas, and temples are often aligned to solstices and equinoxes. On certain days, shadows move across staircases to create visual effects that seem planned down to the degree. The Mayan calendar system was so exact it could track planetary cycles with a precision stunning for its time. Their myths speak of gods from the sky who ordered the world and guided humanity. Some carvings even depict figures in what look like elaborate suits or helmets, complete with breathing gear images that have fueled decades of speculation. Further south in Peru, the Nazca Desert holds another mystery. Enormous geoglyphs etched into the ground. From the surface, you might not even recognize them, but from above, they resolve into giant birds, monkeys, spiders, and geometric patterns, some stretching for hundreds of feet. These lines can really only be appreciated from the air. So why would a culture without airplanes design artwork on such a scale? Some researchers think they were ritual paths or offerings to sky deities. Others wonder if they were messages or markers meant to be seen by someone looking down. Back in Europe, on the plains of England, Stonehenge stands in its weathered circle. Those massive stones, some hauled from quarries dozens of miles away, are arranged with incredible care. Openings line up with the sunrise on the summer solstice and the sunset on the winter solstice. For people whose survival depended on knowing the seasons, tracking these events was crucial. But the choice to embed that knowledge into giant stones arranged over generations suggests more than pure practicality. It hints at reverence, perhaps even an effort to connect earth and sky in a single structure. Then there's Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, a site so disruptive to our historical timelines that it forced many scholars to rethink early human capabilities. Dating to more than 11,000 years ago, it predates pottery, metal tools, and traditional agriculture. And yet, there stand ring after ring of enormous stone pillars, many carved with animals and abstract symbols. These monoliths weigh many tons, and organizing their construction would have demanded planning, labor coordination, and shared belief. By our older models of history, people at that time should have been nomadic foragers without the hierarchy or surplus food needed to support such complex projects. Yet here is a stone sanctuary, maybe a temple, maybe something else, suggesting they were far more organized and symbolically sophisticated than we'd assumed. Head to the Pacific, and you meet the Moai of Easter Island. Enormous stone figures with solemn faces, some weighing tens of tons, moved across the island and erected on stone platforms. Many of these statues are positioned with astronomical considerations in mind, and their very existence raises endless questions about the engineering knowledge and social structure of the people who built them. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat stretches across the landscape, its corridors and towers aligned to solar and lunar events. In central Mexico, Teotihuacan's layout echoes celestial patterns, with avenues and pyramids arranged in a way that seems to mirror constellations. High in the Andes at Machu Picchu, certain stones function almost like astronomical instruments, framing the sun at solstices with impressive precision. All around the world, in culture after culture, we see the same strange combination. Immense efforts of stone construction tied intimately to the movements of the sky. On one level, we can explain a lot of this. If you're living in close relationship with seasons, tides, and rainfall, knowing exactly when the sun will rise there on the horizon can mean the difference between feast and famine. Aligning structures to celestial events helps keep track of time, but in many cases, the precision and sheer scale of the work go far beyond what is strictly necessary for survival. They feel like messages statements that say, "We were here, we knew the sky, it mattered to us." If we imagine, even hypothetically, that our ancestors had contact with visitors from above, then building monuments in stone that point to the heavens would make emotional sense. It would be a way of honoring those origins, signaling loyalty or memory, or simply expressing longing toward whatever or whoever came from the sky. Look closely at the symbols carved into rock faces around the world: spirals, circles, starbursts, radiating lines. In caves across Europe, in petroglyphs in the Americas, in ancient sites throughout Africa and Asia, similar motifs appear again and again. Some may just be artistic patterns, some might be suns, stars, or comets. A few even look like objects in motion or figures wearing odd headgear. To a modern imagination, it's easy to see astronauts in spacecraft. To anthropologists, these may be stylized shamans or deities. Either way, the recurring themes, radiance, transformation, connection to the sky, suggest that whatever was happening above left a deep impression below. There's also the question of durability. Our own civilization writes on screens and paper materials that decay, glitch, or turn to dust quickly. Ancient people, when they wanted something to last, reached for stone. They cut it, stacked it, carved it, aligned it with the heavens. They knew they were working on a timeline much longer than a single lifetime. They may not have known exactly who would come later, but they seemed determined that someone would see, someone would notice. If we toy with the idea of having been placed here, all of this starts to resemble a trail of breadcrumbs. Not hard evidence in the lab sense, but whispers etched in stone. We were not just stumbling around. We were in conversation with something greater. Astronomers sometimes say the universe is like a book written in light. The stars and galaxies are its script. Ancient builders, in a way, added another layer of writing in stone instead of photons. When we study these sites today with satellites and software, we're using our modern tools to decode messages left by beings who, in their own time, were using their best tools to talk to the sky. The messages aren't clear sentences. They're not signed or footnoted, but they share a tone, an insistence that the link between earth and heavens matters. Maybe that's the real gift these ruins offer us. They don't hand us answers about who placed us here or whether anyone did. Instead, they nudge us back into the same posture our ancestors had. Heads lifted, minds open, aware that we stand under a vast, mysterious canopy. Stone is heavy and enduring. Whispers are light and fleeting. Together, across millennia, they form a kind of quiet conversation, still there, if we're willing to listen. When people start to seriously consider the idea that humanity might have been placed on this world, the next question almost always comes: placed by whom? That question opens the door to a whole family of images. Cosmic gardeners, advanced civilizations, divine architects, even future humans. Some vision of a higher intelligence tending to life the way we tend to a farm or a forest. This doesn't have to mean robed gods on clouds or little gray beings in metal saucers. It simply means minds significantly greater than ours, operating at scales or with tools we can barely imagine. Think about how gardening works. A person prepares soil, selects seeds, plants them, waters, and protects the young shoots, then mostly steps back, letting them grow. From the seed's perspective, there's no visible gardener. There's just rich soil, timely rain, and warmth from above. Everything seems to just happen. What if life on Earth is in a similar position? From our vantage point, we just see a planet with the right conditions, evolution doing what evolution does. We don't see any hands. But that doesn't rule out a gardener behind the scenes. The image of cosmic caretakers appears in many places. Ancient myths describe gods descending to teach people how to plant, how to build, how to live together. Modern science fiction imagines advanced beings seeding planets with simple life, and then watching from afar. Philosophers wonder whether there could be intelligences woven into the fabric of reality itself, nudging things along in subtle ways. All of these are different versions of the same basic idea. Maybe we didn't get here alone. When scientists talk about panspermia, the spread of life's building blocks through space, they often frame it as a natural, unguided process. Microbes hitch rides on rocks. Rocks get blasted off one world by impacts, and eventually crash into another. But that concept doesn't rule out intentional seeding. If a civilization advanced enough to cross interstellar distances wanted to populate the galaxy with life, they might load ships or engineered comets with DNA, spores, or entire microbes and send them outward like dandelion seeds on the wind. From their perspective, sprinkling life across star systems might be just another kind of agriculture. If that's the case, then Earth might be one patch in a very large cosmic field. Our oceans and forests could be the flourishing outcome of a choice made by someone or something far away, long ago. That immediately triggers more questions. If we were seeded, was it an act of generosity, curiosity, or necessity? Are we a backup drive for someone's biology? An experiment in how intelligence develops? Or simply one more expression of life in a universe that loves variety? Some thinkers go even bigger and don't talk about discrete beings at all. They suggest that intelligence might exist on cosmic scales, less as individuals and more as a property of the universe. In that view, the gardener is not a person or species, but a pattern, a tendency toward complexity, toward minds, toward self-awareness. The metaphor still fits. Seeds placed, conditions prepared, growth allowed to happen. Our imaginations usually picture higher intelligence as something like us, but more powerful, more knowledgeable. But what if the difference is so great that we would barely recognize it? To an ant, a human hand moving a rock must seem like the act of a god. To us, whatever arranged galaxies and set the constants of physics might be equally incomprehensible. Ancient cultures frequently cast their gods in gardening roles. They shape landscapes, plant life, thin out what is overgrown, and sometimes replant after catastrophe. Flood myths, fire myths, cycles of destruction and rebirth. They all have a flavor of pruning, of starting over, of tending a difficult garden. The gods bestow gifts: fire, agriculture, writing, law. Then they withdraw, leaving humanity to see what it does with them. That's not so different from how a gardener plants and then waits to see what will sprout. The gardening metaphor is powerful for another reason. It doesn't assume constant micromanagement. A gardener isn't hovering over every leaf every second. They set general conditions, check in regularly, correct big problems, and let organic processes do the rest. If we were placed, maybe that's how it happened. Someone or something set the initial conditions, tilled the soil, scattered seeds of life, and then largely stepped aside. There's also the possibility that Earth is not unique in this treatment. If you had the capacity to spread life to more than one world, it would be strange to stop after just one. Maybe there are many gardens out there, each with its own climate, its own species, its own unfolding story. We might be just one success among many attempts, or one of very few. Skeptics argue that we don't need this layer at all. Evolution already explains diversity. Physics and chemistry already account for stars, planets, and habitable zones. Why add gardeners on top? But even within that natural framework, we're still left with deep why questions. Why are the basic constants of physics set just so? Why does the universe produce long-lived stars, stable orbits, complex chemistry? Some call this fine-tuning. Others wave it off as selection bias. We exist in a universe that allows life because logically, we couldn't exist in one that doesn't. For those attracted to the gardener idea, fine-tuning looks a lot like choosing the right soil, the right light, the right season. There's another angle. Look at what we are starting to do. We already selectively breed plants and animals. We've begun editing genomes, designing microbes, and altering ecosystems. We are, in a very real sense, becoming gardeners ourselves. If we can do this now, only a few thousand years into civilization, what might a civilization millions of years older be capable of? For them, dropping life onto young planets might be as routine as planting a new field. From the seed's vantage point, there's no visible planter, just a patch of ground and a sky full of light. If we were placed here, we wouldn't necessarily see the hands that did the placing. We'd only see our patch of ground and our sky. Some thinkers have gone so far as to wonder whether traces of the gardener could be hidden inside us, not in monuments or myths, but in our very DNA. After all, DNA is a code, a language of sorts. If you wanted to sign your work in a way that would endure, embedding a pattern in the genetic code would be a clever approach. A few speculative papers have even proposed that certain mathematical regularities in DNA look like intentional signatures, though these ideas are far from mainstream. Even without that, the structure of DNA itself, its elegance, its efficiency as an information storage system, can feel like overkill for something that's just an accident. Other people think the hints lie not in our genes, but in our consciousness. No other animals we know of build telescopes to study the stars, ponder the origin of the universe, or weave entire philosophies about existence. Maybe that restless questioning, that nagging sense of being part of something larger, is itself the gardener's fingerprint, written not on stone or in code, but in awareness. Imagine for a moment that you are the gardener. You seed a world with life, let it evolve, and watch what happens. At first it's simple: microbes, plants, animals. Then, slowly, a species arrives that begins to ask questions about where it came from. It tells stories of sky beings, builds monuments toward the stars, probes its own DNA and brain, and wonders out loud if it was planted. Maybe, if you're that gardener, this is exactly what you've been waiting for the seed to grow into something curious enough to suspect its own origin. We may never know whether such a gardener exists. They may never return or reveal themselves. Or perhaps they did long ago, and all we have left are myths and ruins. But the idea that we might be part of a deliberate act of planting changes how we see ourselves. If we're seeds in a vast cosmic garden, our existence isn't just a fluke, it's part of a much larger story. And maybe, at some deep level, that's why the image of the gardener feels so strangely comforting. Even to people who don't take it literally, it suggests care. It suggests that we're not entirely alone. It suggests that our questions matter, because they're exactly what a growing consciousness is supposed to have. And perhaps we don't need to know for certain. Perhaps the metaphor alone is enough to nudge us toward treating this world and each other with the kind of respect we'd hope any gardener would want for their garden. If you've ever stared up at the night sky and had the feeling that maybe, somehow, the stars are looking back, you're in familiar company. For as long as we've been human, we've wondered whether life began right here on this world, or whether it arrived from somewhere else. Among the scientific ideas that try to answer that, one stands out for being both simple and far-reaching: panspermia. At its heart, panspermia says, maybe Earth wasn't where life started. Maybe it was where life landed. The term comes from Greek, seeds everywhere. It paints a picture of the cosmos not as empty and lifeless, but as a giant field where the tiny seeds of life are scattered far and wide. Planets in this view are like patches of soil. Most are too harsh, too unstable, or too barren. But every now and then, a planet has just the right conditions for those seeds to sprout. Earth under panspermia is one of those rare fertile patches, and everything living here, including us, could be the result of seeds sown long before our planet even cooled. At first, that idea sounds like pure science fiction. Life drifting through interstellar space, jumping from world to world like pollen on a cosmic breeze, but it's less far-fetched than it seems. We already know that some forms of life are incredibly tough. Certain bacteria and spores survive violent radiation, near vacuum, freezing, and intense heat. Microorganisms have been found clinging to the outside of spacecraft after long stretches in orbit. On Earth, life thrives in boiling vents at the bottom of the ocean, inside rocks deep underground, and in dry, icy deserts that mimic Martian conditions. If life here can shrug off environments that extreme, it's not out of the question that some hardy microbes or spores could survive a journey through space, especially if protected inside rock or ice. We also know that rocks can move between planets. Meteorites found on Earth have been traced back to Mars. Pieces of that planet blasted into space by impacts, then captured by Earth's gravity and pulled down through our atmosphere. Some of those Martian meteorites contain structures that some researchers have interpreted as possible microfossils, though the debate is far from settled. Even without clear fossils, the mere fact that planetary material travels this way is enough to show that a delivery system exists. If rocks can hop between planets, so can organic molecules. And if organic molecules can travel, it's not a huge leap to imagine them as potential seeds. One version of panspermia, called lithopanspermia, imagines this as an entirely natural process. An impact hits a life-bearing world, ejecting debris into space. Some of that debris lands on another world with the right conditions, and life, or at least its raw ingredients, takes hold. In that scenario, life spreads unintentionally, like spores on the wind. Another version, sometimes called directed panspermia, is more deliberate. It imagines a civilization old and capable enough to send out life intentionally, maybe to preserve their own biology against catastrophe, maybe out of sheer curiosity, maybe out of a desire to see life flourish wherever it can. They might launch countless probes or engineered comets, each carrying DNA, spores, or simple organisms. Some would vanish into empty space, some would crash into sterile rocks, but a few would find worlds like ours. If Earth were one of those worlds, our origin story wouldn't stop at this planet. It would stretch back to another star, another time, another home. Humanity would be one branch on a much bigger living tree, with roots light years away. This idea fascinated not only science fiction writers, but some serious scientists. Francis Crick, one of the discoverers of the DNA double helix, considered a form of directed panspermia as a real possibility. Carl Sagan, known for his skepticism and wonder, also entertained the thought. They weren't claiming it must be true. They were acknowledging that the universe is old and vast enough that intentional seeding can't be dismissed out of hand. Of course, panspermia doesn't erase all questions. Skeptics point out that even if life came from elsewhere, you still have to answer, how did it start there? Moving the starting point from Earth to some other world doesn't solve the origin of life. It just pushes the mystery back a step. But even if panspermia only shifts the where, it still radically changes the how many. It suggests life may pop up wherever those seeds land in favorable conditions. That means life might not be a once-in-all-of-history event. It might be scattered across the galaxy, taking different forms under different skies. Experiments on Earth add to the plausibility. When scientists simulate early Earth conditions, mixing water, simple gases, and energy like lightning, amino acids, and other basic organic molecules form on their own. We've found similar molecules on comets and in interstellar clouds. Combine that with the hardiness of microbes and the reality of meteorite transfer, and panspermia moves from wild speculation to a testable, if still unproven, hypothesis. The more deliberate version, directed panspermia, adds another layer that's harder to test, but more narratively potent. If life here was aimed at Earth, who did the aiming? Why target this particular world? And did those seeders intend for beings like us to arise? If they did, are they still watching, somewhere out there? Under that possibility, a lot of our oldest myths start to feel different. Stories of gods from the stars who shaped us, taught us, or interacted with early humans, those become less easy to write off as purely imaginative. They could be distorted folk memories of real encounters with the gardeners who seeded us, civilizations aligning their temples with specific stars, telling of origins in the sky, or describing teachers descending from above. These might be culture's way of remembering where the seeds came from. Then there's DNA itself. It's often called the code of life, a 4-letter language encoding everything from bacteria to blue whales. Some researchers have wondered whether a message could be hidden in that code. If a seeding civilization wanted to leave a signature that would endure across eons, embedding a pattern in DNA would be one way to do it. A few speculative studies have claimed to find mathematical structures in the genetic code that could be interpreted as deliberate markers, though these claims are far from accepted. Still, the idea alone reveals how strangely elegant DNA seems, as if engineered for durability and adaptability. Even if there is no literal signature, the fact that one molecule can store such vast information, self-repair, and evolve new forms has led many to describe it as almost designed, even when they believe entirely in natural origins. Panspermia also reshapes how we think about loneliness. If life is a one-off accident, then we may truly be isolated. If life is a seeded phenomenon, then we likely have distant cousins, some microbial, some perhaps intelligent growing on other worlds. In that case, being placed here isn't just about us. It's part of a broader story, a universe full of seeds trying to take root. Imagine two intelligences on worlds light years apart who both grew from the same original seed stock. They might look nothing alike. Their skies might hold different constellations. But deep in their biochemistry, they'd share a kinship. Meeting them wouldn't just be contact with aliens, it would be a family reunion at a cosmic scale. We don't have that meeting yet. We haven't found undeniable fossils in space rocks. We haven't detected a transmission that says, "We planted you there." We haven't watched a probe arrive with clear intent. What we do have are hints. Microbes that can survive conditions like space, organic molecules in comets, ancient cultures insisting they came from the stars, and the odd acceleration of intelligence in our own lineage. None of that proves panspermia, but taken together, it keeps the idea alive. Even if panspermia turns out to be wrong, thinking in those terms has already had an effect. It encourages us to see life not as a fluke on a single world, but as something stubborn, exploratory, capable of traveling, adapting, and appearing again. It turns the universe from an empty stage into a field where life might keep trying. And whether the seeds fell here randomly or were scattered by someone's careful hand, they might explain why we're here at all. The next time you look up, it's worth remembering. Those stars may not just be distant lights. They may be reminders of where our own thread of life began. We may literally be, in the quietest sense, seeds of the stars. When people imagine us being placed here, their minds almost automatically jump outward to gods, aliens, cosmic beings. But there's another possibility, equally intriguing and in some ways even stranger. Maybe we placed ourselves here, not the we sitting here right now, but us from a far distant future. Humans who've learned to manipulate time the way we currently manipulate space and matter. Time, on the surface, seems straightforward. We mark it with clocks, calendars, birthdays. We feel it as yesterday, today, tomorrow. But our experience of it is slippery. Some hours fly by in conversation. Some minutes stretch endlessly when we're anxious or bored. Physics goes further and tells us that time isn't the rigid, universal tick-tock we once assumed. Einstein showed that time is relative. It runs differently depending on how fast you're moving and how strong the gravity around you is. Move very fast, and your time slows relative to someone standing still. Sit near a black hole, and your seconds stretch out compared to someone far away. Time, in other words, can bend. If time can bend, then in theory, paths through it might loop. Traveling into the future is straightforward in principle. Go very fast, stay near intense gravity, or both, and you experience less time than people elsewhere. In a sense, astronauts already time travel a tiny bit by orbiting Earth. Traveling into the past is trickier. It raises paradoxes. What if you prevent your own birth? What if you change something that makes your journey impossible? But even here, some solutions to Einstein's equations allow for what are called closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that curve back to where and when they started. Wormholes are another theoretical possibility, shortcuts through space-time that might, under certain conditions, link different times as well as different places. These ideas remain ideas. We have no working time machine, but physics doesn't slam the door shut as firmly as you might expect. So imagine, just for a moment, a future humanity that's cracked the code. They've mastered genetics, energy, and the shape of space-time itself. They can see, in exquisite detail, the fragile path that led from early hominins to themselves. Near misses, bottlenecks, extinctions almost happened. They see how close their species came to disappearing through volcanic winters, asteroid scares, pandemics, wars. Faced with that fragility, maybe they decide not to leave their own existence up to chance. Maybe they decide to reach back, not necessarily by sending whole cities back in time, but by sending key information, genes, or even small groups to strategic points in their own prehistory, to nudge events, to stabilize the path. In that scenario, our origin story becomes a loop. We exist because future humans intervened, and future humans exist because we survived long enough to become them. Cause and effect chase each other's tails. From our point of view, we're moving forward through time, discovering things. From their point of view, they might be maintaining a fragile timeline, ensuring their own emergence. If future humans did get involved in their own past, it might explain some of the things that look like sudden jumps, leaps in intelligence, bursts of culture, myths of shining figures appearing from the sky. To someone 10,000 or 50,000 years ago, a human in an advanced suit, arriving in a bright craft, carrying unfamiliar tools, would be indistinguishable from a god or alien. If they offered knowledge how to cultivate crops, forge metals, track the stars, that would look like a divine gift. Some modern theorists suggest that at least part of what we call ancient astronaut lore could just as well be ancient time traveler lore, not strangers from another star system, but descendants from our own future, looping back. In that case, being placed here isn't something done to us from outside humanity. It's something humanity did to itself from a time when it finally had the power. That idea has a strange symmetry. It means we truly do belong here, not because we were chosen by some external species, but because we made sure we'd be here. It also recasts our deep urge to explore. The drive to master physics, expand into space, and probe the nature of time might not be brand new impulses. They might be part of a closed loop we're already caught in, a destiny we gave ourselves. But there's something unsettling about this too. If the future reaches back to shape the past, are our choices really free? Are we living the first run of history, or one iteration in a loop that's played out countless times, tuned a bit each cycle until it leads to a stable outcome? If time travelers have intervened once, do they keep intervening whenever things drift off course? Is our apparent freedom just the wiggle room within a tightly guided script? If they did act, it's likely they try to leave as few obvious traces as possible. You don't want to create glaring paradoxes. Maybe that's why we don't see overt signs. Or from a more speculative angle, maybe the very lack of obvious evidence is what you'd expect from a very careful hand. Our cultural obsession with time travel stories is interesting in itself. From ancient cyclical myths to modern movies about time loops, we seem deeply drawn to the idea that time isn't a one-way line. We imagine people revisiting moments, correcting mistakes, meeting ancestors, or creating themselves. Maybe that's just what happens when a clever animal thinks about memory and prediction long enough. Or maybe it's a faint reflection of something baked into our reality. Picture yourself as a person tens of thousands of years ago, standing in an open field under an unpolluted, star-crowded sky. One night, a light appears overhead brighter than any star. It descends. A figure steps out, wrapped in materials you don't recognize, carrying objects whose purpose you can't imagine. They gesture. They demonstrate. You learn a new way to make fire, or a new plant to cultivate, or new patterns in the sky to watch. Then they leave. How do you explain that to your children? How do your children tell it to theirs? Sooner or later, the story hardens into myth. A god came down. A messenger from the sky brought us knowledge. But maybe, under the most speculative interpretation, it was your distant descendant, closing the loop that allowed them to exist. Whether or not any of that is real, thinking this way adds a new flavor to the idea of being placed. It doesn't require external gods or alien overseers. It suggests that, at least in principle, we could be our own makers. And if there's even a tiny chance the timeline works that way, then everything we do now matters doubly. Our survival, our ethics, our scientific choices shape not only the future, but possibly the deep past that led to that future. The loop, if it exists, depends on us. Even without literal time travel, this way of thinking shifts something important. It moves some of the responsibility for our existence off of hypothetical others and onto ourselves. We can no longer say, if someone else put us here, it's on them. Instead, we have to consider the possibility that, in some sense, we placed ourselves. When scientists zoom in on the human genome, they're reading a story written in 4 chemical letters. It's a story of deep kinship. We share genes with plants, insects, mice, whales. We're clearly part of Earth's family. But within that story, there are some curious twists places where the plot doesn't flow as smoothly as we expect. And in those oddities, the question of whether we were placed here quietly reappears. On paper, we're incredibly close to our primate cousins. We share around 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees. Look only at that number, and we seem nearly identical. But in real life, the difference is enormous. Chimps are clever, social, and capable of using simple tools. They recognize individuals, form alliances, and can even learn basic symbolic systems in captivity. But they don't design skyscrapers or write novels. They're not mapping the cosmos or decoding their own DNA. That thin slice of genetic difference somehow translates into a massive leap in mental capacity. A lot of this jump seems to come not from completely new genes, but from regulatory changes, switches that control how and when genes are expressed. Tweaks to these regulatory regions can drastically change brain growth, neural wiring, and development patterns without rewriting the entire parts list. In humans, several of these control regions appear to have changed unusually quickly, right around the time our lineage branched off. It's as if evolution didn't rewrite the whole instruction manual, but heavily edited the margins, altering the way the story unfolds. Our brain is another place where strangeness shows up. Relative to our bodies, it's oversized. It's so energy hungry that it gobbles about 20% of our calories, even though it's only a fraction of our mass. This is a huge gamble biologically. Bigger brains make childbirth more dangerous. They leave infants helpless for years. They demand constant fuel. Evolution generally prefers efficiency. Why would it back such an expensive, vulnerable design? And why so abruptly? Then there's speech. We have a distinct version of a gene called FOXP2 that plays a major role in language and vocal control. When it's damaged, people struggle with grammar and clear articulation. Other animals have FOXP2 too, but small differences in our version seem tied to our ability to produce and process complex language. Evidence suggests the human variant emerged relatively recently on evolutionary timescales. It doesn't look like a slow accumulation of tiny changes. It looks like a fairly sudden shift, as if something clicked and fully fluent language became possible. Our DNA also carries the ghosts of old infections. A surprising portion of the human genome, some estimates say around 8%, comes from ancient viruses that merged with our ancestral DNA. Most of these viral bits are broken, but some turned out to be critical. One viral gene, repurposed by evolution, helps form the placenta, enabling the kind of reproduction we and other mammals rely on. Another may affect brain development. So a virus, long ago, didn't just make our ancestors sick. It left behind a tool that became part of our design. Were these just accidents that evolution cleverly used? Or, in the most speculative sense, could viral insertions have been a mechanism for installing important genetic modules? Scientists have identified stretches of our genome called human accelerated regions. Segments that remained mostly unchanged for ages, then underwent a burst of rapid change in our lineage. Some of these appear linked to brain growth and neuron connectivity. Most of our DNA evolves very slowly. These areas didn't. They look like they were fast-tracked. Add to that the oddity of chromosome 2. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Other great apes have 24. The difference comes from a fusion event. Two ancestral chromosomes stuck together end-to-end to form the human chromosome 2 we see today. The fused structure is still visible in our DNA. It's as if someone soldered two rods together with just enough care that the machinery kept working, and even gained new properties. Chromosome fusions can happen naturally. But again, the timing and effect here are intriguing, because this fusion may have contributed to differences between us and our closest relatives. For people thinking about placement, these details start to look like clues, coordinated edits rather than purely random noise. But beyond the mechanics, there's the question of what all that genetic tinkering enables. Humans aren't just smart enough to find food and avoid predators. We're over-equipped. We make art that serves no direct survival function. We write music that moves us to tears. We explore mathematics that has no immediate practical use. We build spiritual systems and philosophies to grapple with questions that might never have concrete answers. Our genes gave us capacities that go far beyond simple day-to-day survival. It's as if the blueprint was drawn for something more than just enduring. Critics of design or placement ideas point out, evolution can produce surprising excesses. Features selected for one purpose can later support something very different. Language might have grown out of social bonding and tool coordination. Art might strengthen group cohesion or signal intelligence to potential mates. Those explanations may be partly right. But even then, the clustering and timing of the genetic changes that made us this human still raise eyebrows. Some researchers have floated the idea that our genome could, in principle, contain hidden patterns, mathematical or symbolic structures unlikely to appear by chance. One controversial paper suggested that certain aspects of the genetic code's structure resemble deliberate encoding. Most scientists are cautious about such claims. But the fact that serious people even ask whether our DNA might contain a message shows how uncanny it can feel. If future humans were reaching back to shape their own past, the genome would be a logical place to act. If extraterrestrial gardeners were nudging our evolution, DNA would be the perfect medium. Either way, you don't have to build new cities for a species if you can build new capacities directly into their code. That may be why so many old myths frame our origins as acts of crafting or shaping. Clay molded into form, dust given breath, people made from maize or carved from wood. In a modern context, those images look a lot like metaphors for manipulating raw material, genetic or otherwise, into something new. Even if none of this was truly intentional, even if it was all the result of blind evolutionary processes, the odds remain staggering. A few slightly different mutations, a chromosome that never fused, a viral gene that never stuck, and creatures like us might never have appeared. The fact that we exist at all, able to think these thoughts, to study our own code, to ask whether we are an accident or a design, that alone feels almost miraculous. So when we look at the genome, we're not just staring at a technical manual. We're reading a record of everything that had to happen for us to be here, full of jumps, insertions, and peculiar accelerations. Whether those are nature's improvisations or the faint fingerprints of a placer, the effect is the same, a blueprint for beings who can wonder about their own blueprints. Consciousness is one of those words that seems simple until you try to pin it down. We use it to mean being awake. But it also means having an inner life, the sense of I am here, the stream of thoughts and feelings that only you can directly experience. A cat clearly knows when it's hungry or scared. A bird knows when to migrate. An octopus can solve puzzles in a tank. Many animals show awareness of their surroundings. But human consciousness seems to sit on a different tier. We don't just respond to the world. We reflect on our responses. We build narratives about who we are. We ask what happens when we die, what it all means, and whether our choices matter. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is tricky. You don't need existential dread to avoid predators. You don't need abstract moral philosophy to find food. Yet for tens of thousands of years, humans have painted, formed rituals, and told stories about things beyond immediate survival. It's as if self-reflection and meaning-making were part of our design from very early on. Some scientists say consciousness is simply what happens when brains get complex enough. Neurons fire in ever richer patterns, feedback loops form, and at some threshold, experience emerges. In this view, our sense of being someone is just the brain modeling itself. Even if that's broadly true, it doesn't fully answer the deeper question. Why is there something it feels like to be us at all? Why isn't the brain a dark, mechanical calculator, processing inputs and outputs with no inner light? Why isn't everything we do unconscious? Others argue that consciousness is useful. It lets us simulate the future, rehearse scenarios before acting, learn from our mistakes, and coordinate with others through shared stories. That gives consciousness a survival role, but again, it doesn't quite capture the wild excess of human inner life. We don't just plan hunts or harvests. We imagine worlds that never existed. We invent gods, build virtual realities, compose symphonies that make no sense from a survival-only perspective. Step back, and human consciousness starts to look like more than a tool. It's an opening, a capacity that seems oriented towards something beyond mere staying alive. If someone wanted to create a species that would constantly question its place in the universe, they'd give it exactly what we have: memory, imagination, symbolic thought, and the ability to turn its gaze inward. Ancient stories often frame the creation of humans as the moment when breath or spirit is given. Dust or clay is shaped, and then something extra is added: life, awareness, soul. In many traditions, that breath is what sets humans apart from animals. Not just mobility or intelligence, but the capacity to know that we know. Modern neuroscience dissects the brain in minute detail. We can map which regions light up when we see faces, remember childhood, or feel fear. We can dampen or enhance certain experiences with drugs or electricity. Yet the hard problem remains. How does all that electrochemical activity become the vivid, first-person feeling of being you? Some philosophers and scientists have started to suggest that maybe consciousness isn't something the brain creates from scratch. Maybe it's a fundamental feature of reality, like space, time, or mass, and the brain is more like a receiver or filter. In that case, our minds would be tuning into something that exists beneath or alongside physical processes, rather than producing it entirely on their own. If that's even partly true, then consciousness is not incidental. It's woven into the fabric of the universe, and beings like us are ways that fabric becomes aware of itself. Dreams give us another hint of how strange our minds really are. Every night we slip into worlds our brains generate, landscapes, people, events, often with their own logic and emotional weight. We experience them as if they're real, then wake and carry fragments back. Why would evolution produce such an elaborate internal theater? Memory sorting and problem solving may explain some of it. But the richness of dreams suggests a brain wired for creativity even when offline. Language reflects the same excess. With words, we don't just transmit signals like food here or danger there. We build entire conceptual universes. Justice, infinity, love, nothingness. We pass on myths, laws, jokes, manuals, lullabies. Animals communicate. Humans create meaning. Morality is another curious layer. We don't only have appetites and fears. We also have a sense that some actions are right or wrong, even when no one else is watching, even when it might hurt us to do what feels right. You can partially trace moral instincts to the benefits of cooperation. But human ethics goes further. We debate fairness in distant societies, feel guilt over abstract harms, and sacrifice for ideals that go far beyond our own survival. Art might be the clearest expression of our extra. From ancient cave paintings to modern film and sculpture, we invest vast amounts of energy into creating beauty, telling stories, and capturing fleeting emotions. Art doesn't feed us or shelter us, but we've been making it for as long as we can trace culture. If we were placed here, you could argue that the strongest evidence isn't in our bones or our tools, but in this restless inner life. We are the species that can't stop asking, what is going on? Why are we here? Is there more? Philosophers call it the hard problem for a reason. We can explain what the brain does. We still can't fully explain why there's a subjective someone inside, watching it all unfold. Think about how strange it is that you're here right now, listening, thinking, feeling. Billions of years of cosmic history, stars forming and exploding, planets condensing, cells dividing, organisms evolving. And out of all that, there is you, with your specific memories, worries, hopes. It's hard not to feel like consciousness is more than a glitch. Even if everything about our brains turns out to be explainable in physical terms, the experience of being conscious gives life a sense of intention. Maybe that's the subtle intersection between science and the idea of being placed. Whether or not someone literally set us down here, our awareness makes the world feel chosen, makes our lives feel like they carry weight. And perhaps that's part of the design, or part of what nature happens to do when it builds minds like ours. Either way, human consciousness is both the tool we use to ask if we were placed, and the thing that makes the question feel worth asking in the first place. When we zoom out from neurons and DNA and look at the broad sweep of history, one thing about humans stands out more than anything else. We got very smart, very fast. For millions of years, our ancestors did roughly the same sorts of things. Chipped simple stone tools, followed herds, gathered what plants they could find, huddled around fires for warmth and protection. Then, in a tiny sliver of evolutionary time, everything accelerates. Suddenly caves blossom with art. Spoken language grows rich and structured. Farming emerges. Villages turn into towns, towns into cities. From the Earth's point of view, it all happens in practically a blink. Our current understanding of evolution tells us this should have taken longer. Nature tends to make gradual moves, not leaps. Yet in just a few tens of thousands of years, an eye blink compared to the millions that came before, we go from scattered forager bands to industrial societies altering the entire planet. Compared with other intelligent animals, this speed is striking. Dolphins, elephants, crows, and others show impressive problem-solving and social skills. They use tools. They recognize themselves in mirrors. They grieve. They strategize. But they haven't built global infrastructures, launched spacecraft, or invented algebra. So the question becomes, what happened to us? Why did our mental abilities snowball the way they did? Anthropologists often point to the cognitive revolution, a period around 50,000 years ago when symbolic thinking, complex language, and art seemed to surge all at once. For vast stretches before that, stone tools barely changed. Then, in a relatively short window, they become more specialized and varied. People carve figurines, paint animals and abstract symbols on cave walls, bury their dead with grave goods. It's as though the volume on human imagination suddenly got turned way up. A few thousand years later, agriculture appears across several regions, the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, and others, at roughly overlapping timescales when viewed from geological distance. Humans who had lived as nomads for ages begin to cultivate specific plants, domesticate animals, and settle down. These settled communities lay the groundwork for everything that follows: stored food, specialization, trade, organized religion, writing, government. Once agriculture arrives, civilization doesn't just walk its sprints. Then, in only a few recent centuries, we experience a cascade of revolutions: industrial, scientific, digital, and now informational and genetic. The time between transformative innovations shrinks dramatically. We go from horse-drawn wagons to rockets in a handful of generations, from hand-copied manuscripts to the internet in less than a millennium. On the timescale of evolution, that's almost absurdly fast, all of which raises an uncomfortable question. Are we too smart? Too soon? Other species generally co-evolve with their environments. As prey get faster, predators sharpen their skills. As climates change, ecosystems adapt over long stretches. We, by contrast, outpaced almost everything. Our minds raced ahead of both our environment and our emotional maturity. We learned how to split atoms before we learned how to reliably avoid war. We figured out how to manipulate genomes before we fully understood the long-term consequences. We built systems that can alter the climate before we learned how to live within planetary limits. It's like handing a box of powerful tools to a species still figuring out basic emotional regulation. If we were placed here, that imbalance could be the main test. Can we grow fast mentally without collapsing morally? Can we handle this much power responsibly? Ancient myths often warn about this very thing. Prometheus is punished for giving humans fire. The Tower of Babel story frames human ambition and unity as something that can go too far. Civilizations in various traditions are wiped out in floods or fires when they grow arrogant or corrupt. Whether you read those literally or symbolically, they reflect an old intuition. Rapid growth without wisdom is dangerous. Even from a purely scientific viewpoint, something similar shows up in the idea of the Great Filter, a hypothetical stage of development that most intelligent species don't survive. Maybe many civilizations reach a point where their technological power exceeds their wisdom, and they wipe themselves out. If that's true, our sudden surge in intelligence might not be a gift so much as a challenge, a narrowing bridge that only a very careful few can cross. On the other hand, if intelligence evolved this quickly in us through entirely natural means, then maybe the universe does occasionally produce species that vault ahead of everything else around them. That doesn't necessarily mean design, but it does make us rare. We might be the one planet in a vast radius where minds like ours emerged this fast. Either way, we find ourselves with a strange kind of responsibility. We're smart enough to ask, were we placed here? We're smart enough to dream up cosmic gardeners and future time travelers. But are we smart enough to use the power we already have without destroying ourselves? Our speed has put us in a precarious position. We're like teenagers with the keys to a vehicle we barely understand. If we make it through this phase, if we learn to align our technology with our ethics, our power with our empathy, we might join whatever larger story is unfolding in the universe. If we fail, we become one more silent ruin. From a placement perspective, you could see this as the heart of the trial. We were either given or evolved into this level of intelligence. Now the question is whether we can grow into it without burning everything down. From a purely naturalistic perspective, the same trial exists. Nature doesn't care why we got this smart. It only cares whether we survive the consequences. So maybe too smart too soon isn't just an oddity. Maybe it's the defining feature of our moment. It's the reason the question, what if we were placed here, hits so hard because no matter how we got here, we are now the species that can alter the fate of the entire planet. Whether by design, accident, or some mix of both, we've arrived at a crossroads, and what we do next may be the real answer to the question of whether we deserve the intelligence we have. As if we allow, even for the sake of imagination, that humanity could have been placed here, then sooner or later, we run into a deeper question. Why? If someone or something chose this world, this species, and this time, what was the point? It's one thing to ask how we got here, through evolution, seeding, intervention, time loops, or some combination. It's another to ask what all of this is for. Purpose is slippery, even in our own lives. We spend years wondering why we're here, what we're supposed to do, what makes a life meaningful. Stretch that question out to cover the whole species, and it becomes almost overwhelming. Still, it's hard to avoid. If we were placed, there was some intention behind it, and we naturally want to know what that intention might have been. One possibility is harshly clinical. We're an experiment. In that view, some advanced intelligence created or modified us to see what would happen. Earth is the lab, humanity is the subject, history is the data. Our wars, our art, our technologies, our moral struggles, all of it might be monitored, recorded, and analyzed for reasons we can't grasp. If that's true, then the purpose isn't for us at all, it's for them. We might be equivalent to lab rats, unaware of the context we're part of. It's not a comforting picture, but it does mirror what we already do. We study animals, ecosystems, and even entire planets with little regard for how they interpret our presence. Another, more hopeful possibility is that we're part of a project of preserving life. If life is rare, or if an earlier civilization wanted to prevent its extinction, they might spread it wherever they can, a kind of cosmic reforestation. In that case, Earth is one of many seeded worlds, and our existence serves the purpose of continuity. We're one more place where life can try to thrive. This view feels gentler. It frames us as participants in a larger mission, the survival of life itself against a cold, empty background. A third possibility, we're meant to grow into something else. Maybe who we are now is not the end point, but an early stage. If we were placed here by beings more advanced than us, maybe they expect us to mature, technologically and ethically, to the point where we can join them. In this view, Earth is a training ground, not a final destination. Our challenges, ecological, social, existential, are like curriculum. We're being stretched, tested, shaped. Many spiritual and mythic traditions echo this. Humans, as children of the gods, still learning, still evolving in ways that are more than biological. Under this interpretation, the purpose of being placed is growth, not comfort or safety, but transformation. There's also the humbler thought that we might never fully grasp the purpose. If the intelligence behind our placement is vastly beyond us, its motives may be as opaque to us as human urban planning is to an ant. We might guess. We might tell stories. But we may never know for sure. Even so, the very act of asking why can shape us. On a more human-centered level, some people argue that purpose doesn't have to come from outside. Even if we were placed here, the meaning of our existence might still be up to us. We might exist simply to live, to experience, to love, to create, to wonder. If a higher intelligence set the stage and stepped back, we could see that as an invitation. You decide what this will mean. Different frameworks give different answers. If we're an experiment, the goal is understanding for someone else. If we're part of a life-spreading project, the goal is survival and diversity. If we're in training, the goal is growth and readiness. If purpose is ours to define, the goal is whatever we choose to make it. There's another angle. Maybe we were placed here not just for our own sake, but for others. Perhaps humanity has a role to play in a much larger network of intelligence. We might be destined to spread life further, to become gardeners ourselves. We might be expected to produce something unique, our art, our perspective, our particular flavor of consciousness, and contribute it to a broader cosmic culture. On the darker side, there's a less flattering scenario. We could be a resource. Maybe we were shaped to serve someone else's needs, as labor, as biological material, as a data source. It's an unsettling thought, but no more than what we ourselves do with animals, crops, and even data about each other. Whatever the truth, the why question changes how we see ourselves. If we imagine we're here for a reason, we live differently. We take our actions more seriously. We see ourselves as part of a story, not just a random flicker in time. Perhaps the deeper insight is this: asking why might itself be part of the purpose. A universe in which a species emerges that can reflect on its own existence, wrestle with meaning, and take responsibility for its choices is very different from one in which life is purely automatic. Maybe the point was never to hand us a clear mission. Maybe the point was to see what we would do with the freedom to ask the question at all. In the end, we may never know if we're here for experiment, for continuity, for growth, for beauty, or for reasons outside anything we can imagine. But in the space of not knowing, we're forced to choose. How will we live? How will we treat each other? How will we treat this world? And in those choices, we quietly write our own answer to the question of why we're here. When we shift our gaze from stars and genes back to the ground under our feet, another perspective opens up. What if the planet itself is part of the message? Nature doesn't just host us, it teaches. Every forest, river, storm, and creature is like a page in a book about how life actually works. If we were placed here, maybe we were dropped into a living classroom. Consider the cycles that run through everything. Nothing in nature simply ends. A fallen leaf decays into soil. That soil feeds the next tree. A dead animal nourishes scavengers, then the earth, then the plants those animals once ate. Water rises as vapor, drifts as clouds, returns as rain, again and again. Birth, growth, decay, transformation, over and over. The lesson is simple and profound. What looks like an ending is usually a change of form. If we were meant to learn from where we are, nature might be nudging us to see that loss and renewal are bound together. Then there's cooperation. We tend to imagine nature as a harsh competition. Survival of the fittest, in the most brutal sense. But the deeper we look, the more we see networks of support. In forests, trees communicate chemically and electrically through underground fungal webs. Nutrients flow from strong trees to weaker ones, from one species to another, sustaining the whole ecosystem. Bees pollinate flowers while collecting nectar. Coral reefs provide habitats for countless species. Wolves keep herbivore populations in check, which in turn protects plant life and waterways. Life, it turns out, doesn't just compete, it collaborates. If we were placed here to pay attention, one of the loudest lessons might be, individual thriving is tied to collective health. Adaptation is another teacher. Species shape themselves to their environments. Fish develop bioluminescence in deep oceans, desert plants store water, Arctic animals grow insulating fur. Life's strategy, again and again, is not to fight conditions endlessly, but to adjust to them. Humans, with our rapidly growing powers, often do the opposite. We try to force the environment to adapt to us at all costs. Maybe the evolutionary curriculum we're facing now is whether we can rediscover that older wisdom, that real resilience requires flexibility, not just control. Predator and prey relationships reveal another kind of balance. On the surface, they seem purely violent, but over time, they stabilize populations, preventing species from overrunning their ecosystems. When humans remove predators, systems often destabilize. Prey overpopulate, vegetation disappears, and landscapes degrade. It's as if nature is holding up a mirror and saying, balance doesn't mean the absence of danger. It means tension held in dynamic equilibrium. The seasons hold their own teachings. Spring bursts with new life. Summer brings expansion. Autumn is harvest and letting go. Winter is rest and conservation. Every year, the planet rehearses the same pattern of emergence, fullness, release, and quiet. Many cultures have woven their rituals around these cycles, seeing them as metaphors for human life. Childhood, adulthood, aging, death, and perhaps renewal. If we were placed here to learn, the turning of the seasons is like a slow, gentle reminder that cycles, not straight lines, dominate reality. Rivers, tides, and mountains speak to us about time. Rivers carve canyons drop by drop. Tides rise and fall with lunar rhythms. Mountains rise and erode over spans that make human history look like a blink. If we take those as lessons, we're being shown that real change sometimes takes patience, that not every problem can be rushed. Even very small things can be teachers. A spider rebuilding a web after it's torn apart. No complaining, just action. A seed pushing through heavy soil, drawn toward a light it's never seen. A flock of birds turning in perfect unison, each aware of only a few neighbors, yet moving as if guided by a single mind. Everywhere we look, patterns of persistence, transformation, and connection are acting themselves out. Many indigenous wisdom traditions have long viewed Earth as a teacher. The land isn't just property, it's a relative, a mentor. Animals are respected as people of a different kind, with their own roles and insights. The wind, the rains, the stars, all are seen as part of a larger conversation. In these views, being human includes listening to the land, the water, the more than human world. Modern ecology, in its own language, echoes this. It shows how every organism is linked in food webs and feedback loops. Change one element too drastically, and the whole system can unravel. If we were placed here with a lesson plan, it might look like this. Learn interdependence, learn restraint, learn reciprocity. When we ignore these lessons, consequences follow. Overharvest a forest and the soil washes away. Pump too many greenhouse gases into the air, and the climate shifts. Pollute rivers and oceans, and the very foundation of the food chain trembles. The planet pushes back, not out of malice, but through cause and effect. From that angle, nature's punishments are really feedback. They're the environment's way of teaching us limits. If someone or something placed us here, maybe they didn't write instructions on stone tablets. Maybe they wrote them in ecosystems, hoping we'd pay attention. In that sense, we are like students with a choice. Learn from the examples around us, or ignore them and bear the consequences. Our intelligence gives us the power to either harmonize with these lessons or override them temporarily. But reality always has the final say. Even if nobody literally placed us, Earth still functions as a kind of teacher, not in a mystical way, but through visible patterns and outcomes. We can choose to align our societies with those patterns. Cyclical use of resources, balanced give and take, respect for limits, or we can pretend we're outside of nature and see how far that illusion carries us. If we were placed here, maybe it wasn't just to look up at the stars, but also to look around at the ground, the trees, the rivers, and to realize that the answers we're seeking out there have been modeled here all along. Civilization might be one of our greatest achievements, and also one of our hardest tests. The moment we stopped living only in small scattered bands and started building villages, then cities, a new kind of challenge appeared. Survival was no longer just about finding food or staying warm through the winter. It became about how to live together in groups too large for everyone to know everyone else. If we were placed here, maybe this was always part of the plan. Not just, can you survive as animals? But can you survive as societies? Civilization forces us to juggle freedom and order. Too much freedom and chaos takes over. Violence, lawlessness, collapse. Too much order, and we end up in suffocating systems. Tyranny, oppression, stagnation. Every culture has wrestled with this dilemma. From early city-states in Mesopotamia to modern nation-states, we've been experimenting with different balances. Tribal councils, kings, empires, democracies, theocracies. The invention of law itself says something profound about us. Most animals are guided mainly by instinct and immediate social cues. We invented rules, ideas that exist outside any one person, declaring what should and shouldn't be done. That step marks a turning point. We're not just shaped by nature anymore. We're shaping ourselves. Power is another central piece of the puzzle. Put enough people together, and some will end up with more power than others, more resources, more influence, more control. History is full of leaders who used power well, and plenty who didn't. Empires have brought both order and destruction, science and slavery, architecture and atrocity. The recurring questions are, what do we do with power once we have it? Can we wield it without abusing it? Can we structure societies so that power serves rather than dominates? If we were placed here, You could say that one of the main tests of civilization is, can we handle power without destroying ourselves? Resources complicate the test further. Once we settle, land, water, minerals, and trade routes become concentrated. They can be owned, hoarded, fought over. Conflicts arise, wars over territory, disputes over access to rivers, struggles over oil, metals, and now data. Societies that manage resources wisely tend to prosper. Those that strip their environments or mismanage abundance often falter. Again, the pattern repeats. Balance versus overreach. Technology multiplies the stakes. Every time we invent something new, we solve one problem and usually create others. Fire brings warmth and defense, but also arson and weapons. Agriculture feeds more people, but also introduces class divisions and new diseases. Machines increase productivity, but also enable pollution, mechanized war, and mass surveillance. Digital networks connect us globally, but also amplify misinformation, addiction, and fragmentation. Civilization is essentially a feedback loop between our intelligence and our environment. The smarter we become, the bigger the consequences of our mistakes. Historians often point out that civilizations are fragile things. They rise, crest, and fall. Egypt, Rome, the Maya, the Indus Valley, countless kingdoms and empires, all reached astonishing heights, then collapsed, were conquered, or faded until only ruins and stories remained. Causes vary: invasion, internal corruption, economic collapse, environmental shifts. But the pattern is eerily consistent. Some see this as inevitable. Nothing lasts forever. Every complex system eventually reaches its limits. Others view it as a warning. If a culture refuses to learn from its mistakes, clings to unsustainable habits, or ignores the limits of its environment, collapse becomes almost guaranteed. If we were placed here, it's possible that this rise and fall pattern was built into the test. Can you create complex societies that don't ultimately destroy themselves? Even our old stories seem to remember this. Myths of great floods wiping out corrupt worlds, stories of towers reaching for heaven and then being brought down, legends of once great cities punished for arrogance. Whether symbolic or based on real events, they all carry the message: there are limits. Civilizations that forget humility pay a price. Today, the challenge of civilization has gone global. We are no longer talking about the fall of one empire while others continue. We're talking about a planetary system, industrialized, interconnected, codependent. We now have tools that can alter the climate, acidify the oceans, change the composition of the atmosphere, and engineer life itself. No previous civilization held this level of power. The stakes have never been higher. How we treat the environment, how much we extract, how quickly we burn, how willing we are to shift course, will likely determine whether our global civilization endures, transforms, or collapses. How we treat each other matters just as much. We still fight wars, still divide ourselves into us and them, still allow massive inequality and injustice. At the same time, we see movements for human rights, environmental protection, and global cooperation growing stronger. In many ways, civilization holds both our best and worst impulses in a single container. If we think in terms of placement, you could say that the real exam is not, can we be clever? We've already passed that. It might be, can we be wise? Our intelligence gave us the power to build skyscrapers, internet, nuclear reactors, AI. Civilization asks us whether we can match that power with empathy, foresight, and restraint. Whether or not anyone placed us, this is the challenge in front of us. The test is real, even if the tester is not. We don't know how our story will end. Will we stabilize and thrive for millennia? Will we crash and leave only relics behind? Will something entirely unexpected happen? The uncertainty might be the most important part. A test is only a real test if the outcome isn't fixed. What we do know is that each rise and fall before us left lessons engraved in stone, encoded in myth, buried in ruins. Maybe our placement, however you interpret it, includes not just being born into a world, but inheriting its memory. What we choose to learn or ignore from that memory will shape whatever comes next. Once you start asking whether humanity might have been placed here, another question naturally follows. If so, by whom? And can we find them? In some ways, this might be the oldest question we've ever asked. Religion, mythology, philosophy, and science are all, in their own languages, attempts to trace our existence back to a source. Temples, churches, mosques, and shrines are physical expressions of that search. Prayer, meditation, rituals. They're all ways of reaching towards something we feel might be there, but can't see directly. Myths tell of sky parents, creator gods, cosmic architects. These stories differ in detail but share the intuition that we did not simply appear unaided. Modern science has its own search patterns. Radio telescopes sweep the sky, listening for signals that look more structured than random noise. This is SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So far, we've heard mostly silence, with a few intriguing bursts like the "wow" signal that remain unresolved. But the effort continues because a single confirmed signal would change everything. Space agencies send probes to Mars, Europa, Enceladus, Titan, looking for signs that life ever existed, or still exists, beyond Earth. Even finding simple microbes elsewhere would be huge. It would tell us that life is at least a two-planet phenomenon, which makes it far more plausible that someone out there could have placed life here. Meanwhile, other scientists and philosophers search inward. They examine DNA for strange patterns, study consciousness for clues, and ask whether there might be signs of design or intention hidden in the structure of reality itself. Some go further and suggest that our universe might be a simulation. If that were true, our creators might be programmers, existing in some larger reality beyond our own. In that framing, discovering our makers would mean finding evidence that our world is running on some kind of code. Again, highly speculative. But it shows how the longing to know who made us keeps morphing into new forms as our knowledge grows. Emotionally, the search for our makers isn't just about curiosity. It's about relationship. Just as children naturally want to know their parents, to understand where they came from, we seem wired to want the same on a cosmic scale. If our makers are benevolent, the thought is comforting. We're cared for, part of a bigger story. If they're indifferent, we might feel abandoned, like orphans. If they're manipulative or self-interested, we might feel used or exploited. That emotional risk is part of why some people resist the whole idea, preferring either a strictly natural universe or a clearly defined faith. But history shows that the search rarely stops. Ancient astronomers watched the sky with naked eyes and stone tools. Today we use radio waves, space telescopes, and particle accelerators. The tools change. The underlying question doesn't. If we were placed here, our makers might have left signs. They could be physical artifacts hidden in the solar system. They could be patterns in our DNA. They could be mythic memories embedded in stories. Or they might prefer to stay hidden, to see what we do on our own. It's also possible that the search is the point. By trying to find our makers, we're forced to grow, to refine our tools, sharpen our thinking, and examine ourselves more honestly. Even if we never receive a clear, undeniable answer, the act of looking becomes transformative. We become a species that asks, that explores, that refuses to be satisfied with easy narratives. You could say that if we were placed here by anyone, one of the instructions embedded in us is simply seek. Seek outward into the stars. Seek inward into mind and matter. Seek meaning. And in that seeking, we end up discovering not only more about the universe, but more about ourselves. For most of human history, the idea that we were not alone was almost taken for granted. The sky was full of gods, spirits, and ancestors. Every star could be a home, every thunderhead a sign. It's only in the last few hundred years, as science stripped away some of that mythic layer, that we've begun seriously to entertain the possibility that maybe we are alone. The thought is stark. Billions of stars, countless planets, and life conscious enough to ask questions only on this one small world. But what if that's not how things are? What if we're not alone? What would that mean for our sense of being placed here? The first and simplest implication would be, life is not unique to Earth. It's not a miracle confined to our rock, but a feature of the universe. Even discovering simple bacteria on another planet or moon would prove that the spark of life can ignite more than once. That alone would suggest that seeding, whether natural or directed, might be common. Earth would then be one garden among many. If we were to find intelligent life, the shift would be even more dramatic. We would know that minds like ours, or perhaps far greater than ours, exist elsewhere. Intelligence would no longer be a strange, one-off accident, but part of a broader pattern. The idea that we might have been placed here would feel less lonely. Other civilizations might have been placed where they are too. We'd be one experiment among many, one project in a vast portfolio. At the same time, the realization that we're not alone would bring new anxieties. Are they older and more advanced than we are? Do they see us as peers, children, data, or resources? Are they benign, curious, indifferent, or dangerous? The stories we tell reflect that tension. Benevolent visitors uplifting humanity, or hostile invaders treating us like insects. Some scientists talk about the Great Silence. We haven't yet heard from anyone. Others counter that the universe is enormous and we've only just begun listening. Still others suggest that advanced civilizations might stay quiet on purpose, to avoid drawing attention to themselves, just as we might not shout in a dark forest if we didn't know what was out there. If we're not alone, then placement becomes part of a larger pattern. Maybe a network of civilizations is woven across the galaxy, each seeded, guided, or self-evolved, each facing their own version of the intelligence power wisdom test. If we ever detect a clear signal or meet another intelligence face to face, our view of ourselves will change instantly. Religions would reinterpret their stories. Philosophies would shift their focus. Science would race to understand the new data. Some people would feel threatened. Others would feel profoundly relieved. We're not the only ones carrying this strange burden of consciousness. Even without direct contact, the growing likelihood that planets like Earth exist elsewhere, and that life could exist there, already nudges us to rethink our uniqueness. Maybe part of the meaning of not being alone is that we're part of a cosmic community we haven't met yet. Or, if we never find others, maybe the meaning lies in the attempt, that we stretched our senses and minds as far as we could, refusing to be confined by one small world. In either case, the question of being alone or not pushes us beyond ourselves. It asks us to imagine other ways of being, other histories, other placements. It forces us to face what kind of neighbors we would be if we were the ones doing the contacting. And it quietly reminds us that whether or not anyone else is out there, we already have each other on this singular, fragile world. After all the theories, after the myths, the science, the speculation, there comes a point where the mind gets tired of reaching, where it feels right to simply pause, to breathe, to sit with the possibility that some questions might never be fully answered, and that this might be okay. Mystery has always been woven into human life. Our ancestors didn't know the age of the universe, the structure of DNA, or the physics of black holes, but they felt the same pull we do when they looked at the sky. The same mix of awe and smallness. They built stories and rituals not because they possessed certainty, but because they needed a way to live with uncertainty. In our time, we've illuminated many corners of the dark. We know more about the cosmos than any generation before us. Yet, paradoxically, our sense of mystery has deepened. We now know how big we don't know. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does the universe have laws that allow for life? Why does consciousness exist at all? If we were placed here, maybe that placement included a built-in cloud of unknowing, not as a flaw, but as a feature. Maybe we were never meant to have every answer lined up. Maybe the point was not to win the game of knowledge, but to play it endlessly. Resting with mystery doesn't mean giving up curiosity. It means letting curiosity coexist with acceptance. It's like sitting by a river. You don't have to trace every drop back to its origin or predict exactly where it will end up. You can simply watch it flow, understanding some things, letting others remain opaque. Throughout history, some of the wisest voices, philosophers, mystics, scientists alike, have found value in this posture. They asked, probed, experimented, and then, at the edges of what they could know, they learned to say, "I don't know yet," or even, "I may never know." And that's part of the beauty. In everyday life, we already do this more than we notice. We don't fully understand why love feels the way it does, why music can untie a knot in the heart, why a certain landscape makes us feel at home. We live in those mysteries anyway. Perhaps our placement here, if there was one, is similar. We don't have to understand the full map to live meaningfully on the piece we can see. Sometimes people fear that mystery means weakness or failure, but it can also mean humility and openness. A closed answer shuts down exploration. A held question keeps it alive. If someone did place us here, maybe they didn't want us to be obedient receivers of a finished script. Maybe they wanted co-authors, beings who would ask, imagine, test, revise. Mystery gives us room to do that. It invites creativity, empathy, and shared wondering. As you sit here now, wherever you are, it's worth noticing how extraordinary it is that you can even follow this line of thought. You're a temporary arrangement of matter and energy, held together for a brief time in a universe of unimaginable scale. And yet you can ask, why am I here? Were we placed? What does it mean? Maybe that in itself is enough. Whether we were seeded by distant gardeners, shaped by future humans, arose entirely from natural processes, or exist in some blend of all these stories, one thing is certain. We're here. We're conscious. We can care. We can choose. We can look at this world and at each other and decide how we want to live. Perhaps that's the quiet heart of the whole question of placement. Not whether someone set us here like pieces on a board, but what we do with the fact that we find ourselves here at all. In the end, mystery isn't the enemy of meaning. It's the space in which meaning is made. We may never know, with perfect clarity, who placed us, why, or whether anyone did. But we can live as though our lives matter, as though this planet matters, as though our questions matter. And maybe, just maybe, that is exactly what we were meant to do.